politics here. The fact that I like this, the fact that Tony likes this, doesn't mean that other people like it. If you think about participation income as the more politically feasible version of a basic income, you need to think politics. You need to think building a coalition of people who get into that for very, very different reasons. You know, simply Tony saying, well, you know, this is my option, this is my preferred option, that's just not going to work. Okay? At the end of the day, we think that is a serious problem. And there's something slightly funny about the fact that, you know, in some ways, Tony Atkinson, who came at this idea thinking very much about politics, now seems to be missing the very political point that we were trying to make. And to kind of conclude this particular point, at the end of the day, this is not just about administration. Administration instability breeds political instability. And again, the sort of collision around participation income can fall down quite fast. Now, I'm sort of running out of time here. I'm going to very, very briefly say something positive, because I don't want to just be very critical the whole time. There is something in Tony Atkinson's earlier piece, specifically, where I think that we should start paying more attention to. This is not about the participation requirement. This is not about the fact that we have to give up on unconditionality. This is about a very different claim. At that time, in 1996, Tony Atkinson made a very specific claim, which is the following. He said citizens' income, or basic income, is usually seen as an alternative to social insurance, as a replacement for the Beveridge principle of social security. And he says, in my judgment, this is a mistake. The aim of a citizen's income, or basic income, should be to cut dependence on means-tested benefits. And he says that the reason for doing this, or one of the reasons for doing this, is because there is still so much strong social support for social insurance, social security. So think about this in the context now. We're now facing a very different context. There's a lot of people now who are genuinely interested in experimenting, piloting, thinking through issues around basic income, the unconditional version. So it's no longer necessary, per se, to have the participation, right? We can start thinking about this unconditionality. But we still have this really vexed question about, how does basic income fit into a welfare state, which in many cases is still made up of a social assistance layer and a social insurance layer. And here we have a lot of difference of opinion. We have a lot of people who think that a basic income should replace social assistance and a large part of social insurance, right? It should integrate the principles of insurance and assistance. It should be fully universal at a very decent level. It should make sure that it captures people way beyond those who are just, you know, in poverty and making use of social assistance and so on and so forth. The alternative view, the one in some sense that we could say builds on Atkinson here, is to think very carefully about the political realities again. You know, there is strong support for social insurance. Social assistance is a very different ballgame. A lot of institutions, a lot of institutional divergence between these two models. Is it really politically feasible, to think about this income in this fully expansive sense, or should we perhaps be politically more savvy and try in some way to just think about basic income in a sort of weaker sense, if you like, plugging the gaps of a social assistance model that is leaving a lot of people behind, that is really pressurizing a lot of people, making social assistance unconditional, but at the same time putting effort into promoting and rebuilding, if you like, if that's possible, if that's feasible, some of the social security principles. So still have a hybrid system. That, I think, is an interesting debate that we have to have in much more detail, and in some sense, it's a challenge that I'd like to take from Tony Atkinson. It's a positive challenge.
Thanks, Jurgen. Finally, we'll finish this first round. Almaz.
Thank you. So I take a slightly different perspective on the participation income question from my colleagues here. I'm really interested in the normative implications more than the policy or practical or even political implications of participation income. And I should say at the outset that although I'm really critical of the participation income, I have tremendous amount of respect for Tony Atkinson's work, and I think that really everything I'm about to say is something that you can draw from his own works. So I'm a little confused about his continuing support for the participation income because I see so much of his own work that supports unconditionality. So in the first article, the 1996 article, it's very clear that the participation requirement is against the unconditionality of an additional basic income. Was really based on a fear of free riding. Right? The sense was that we could not justify politically or not get political support for unconditional benefit because people who got it might then free ride. They might not contribute to the economic activity that funds the basic income. And I think that my first critique of this position is that, like a lot of mainstream political theory and policy work, the fear of free riding, the particular way that it's described, is based on a work-leisure dichotomy. Right? This is familiar to readers of John Rawls and the debate between Rawls and Philippe Pérez on whether surfers should be fed. Right? So Rawls made it very clear, he was criticized with theory of justice for suggesting that perhaps people who would choose not to work would be considered among the least advantaged who were entitled to income support. And he was asked to clarify that, and he came down very firmly and said, those who serve all day off Malibu must find some other way to support themselves. That's not something that's going to be enforced on the majority. And this distinction between work and leisure, I think these are the two activities that are possible for people, and if they're not working, they must be engaged in leisure. And in this context, leisure is just an expensive taste, and why should we subsidize leisure any more than we would subsidize a taste for expensive wine? Well, that dichotomy leaves out another very important activity in human life, which is care work. And so here I'm thinking about care quite expansively, not just the care of infants and the elderly and so on, but the kind of effective affiliative work that is an incredibly important part of any society. This is it's a dilemma for political theory, and it's a dilemma for debates about income support, because there's a tendency to see care work as something that can, in one of two ways, as something that can be fully commodified through the welfare state, through institutionally socially provided childcare, healthcare, elder care, etc., so that all carers, predominantly women, but not only women, can go into the workplace. And political philosopher Nancy Fraser has a term for this, which is the universal breadwinner model. Right? So if we think about our social programs, we need to think about the fact that everybody's going to be out working, and we need to provide the supports necessary to support that. So that's one way of solving the care problem. The other way is to say, well, we're going to have workers who are employed in paid employment, but then we're also going to have carers. And so we need to come up with some way that caregivers are treated similarly to workers. And so this she calls the caregiver parity model. Right? So this would suggest that there's some kind of payment, some kind of income support for caregiving, which could of course be extended to other kinds of voluntary work, as Tony Atkinson proposed. But essentially, it's an alternative to work. It's an alternative to earning in paid employment. And Nancy Fraser critiques these two models as not doing anything, for many reasons, but in particular for not doing anything about the question of who does the care work. How do we redistribute the care work? Do we assume that care work is always going to be either the work of a particular group in society that will be paid some compensation, but probably not as much as can be earned in employment, or is it going to be completely commodified, in which case care responsibilities will tend to be redistributed from more affluent workers, people who have opportunities for higher paid work, to people who don't have those opportunities, who tend to be lower paid for care work. And I should say that I'm American, so my context is the American context in which paid care work is very poorly paid as well. So, the first critique is that the larger perspective that Atkinson employs leaves out care, which is ironic because he specifically mentions care as a form of participation that requires, that it should be entitled to some support. So that's the first part of my paper. The second part is to say that when we think about compensated care work in the way that Atkinson proposed through participation income, one of the problems is that this imposes a form of selective reciprocity. Right, so one of the reasons, if you're afraid of a free rider, if you're concerned about free riding, one of the philosophical arguments that has been used to justify that fear is to say that, well, it's fine, we want to, as part of the community, support those who, for whatever reason, can't participate in income-generating employment and activities, but we expect a certain degree of reciprocity for that. If we're going to give benefits to those who are not employed and that are financed by the taxes on those who are employed, then we expect some kind of reciprocity. And so that's traditionally, in more traditional forms of welfare provision, is the willingness to work, right? As long as you're looking for work, you're actively seeking work, you'll accept whatever work is offered, that's considered enough reciprocity to receive social assistance benefits. And Atkinson is shifting that to say, well, participation, it can be the form of reciprocity for those benefits. So what I argue is that if you take a perspective that begins from gender, begins from care, that what this suggests is that what the participation income enforces is a selective reciprocity. It's a reciprocity for cash benefits only, but not for care. Right? Because we are all recipients of a tremendous amount of unpaid care work throughout our lives, not just when we're small or when we're very old, but really throughout our lives. And there's no enforcement mechanism for reciprocating for that care. Right? So the participation income enforces a selective reciprocity. The other point that I made in this paper, and again, this is one where I find myself to be confused because what Atkinson devoted so much of his work to in the last decade or so, maybe 2 decades, was explaining and documenting the incredible rise in income and wealth inequality, particularly in advanced economies in Western Europe and in the United States. And so there, the fact that so much of the inequality in society now is based on what we would, in a philosophical sense, think of as unearned resources that accrue to wealth as wealth multiplies without the individual labor effort that typically justifies desert of earnings, means that the participation income also enforces a selective conditionality, because it's the participation income as a condition for receipt of benefits, of income benefits, of social assistance benefits, but not for all the protections of wealth and high incomes that are also generated by society and communally contributed to by society. So those are the 2 aspects that I wanted to highlight: the selective reciprocity and the selective conditionality of the participation income. And lastly, what I wanted to say is that, again, somewhat as a matter of confusion for me based on his other work, this lingering attachments to the participation income, which in fact has grown stronger in the 20 years since the original article was published. In that original piece, it was very clear that the participation income was meant to be a political strategy to gain support for increased social assistance benefits. In the 2015 book, he goes a little bit further, and he says that the participation condition should, in my view, be interpreted positively. It is an answer to the question, who who is eligible for basic income? The answer conveys a positive message about reciprocity, a message that is both intrinsically justified and more likely to garner political support. So we move from simply a political justification of participation to a normative justification as well, although the normative justification is, I would say, underdeveloped in the book. And the other aspect of it that has shifted is that in the 1996 the participation requirement was very broadly defined. In fact, one could say incoherently defined because it defines participation, not participating because you're retired or disabled, but it mentioned care work, voluntary work, education, etc. In the 2015 book, the category of participation has been narrowed as far as care goes to home care for infants, children, or frail elderly people, in which means that caring for adolescent children or for elders without disabilities has become leisure, not participation, and no longer satisfies the participation requirements. And this suggests that the categories of participation, even if we were able to agree on them and define them, shift over time as social norms change. Of course, when social norms change, they don't change for the benefit of all equally. So there are some, and I'm old enough to have gone through this change myself, right? In 1996, it would have been okay for me not to work as long as I was caring for anybody. But now, 20 years later, I might have created a life for myself that involved now caring for older children or for elders who are not frail, and that is no longer considered to be part of participation. So the underlying question to me is who gets to define what participation is? And because the participation requirements are only imposed on those who don't have enough resources of their own so that they need social assistance, what it means is that people who have monopolized most of our common resources are the ones who are able to define it and to exclude me or include me depending on what they believe is worthy of support rather than what I do. And to the extent that inequalities are justified, they're only justified because we think that they contribute to the common good. Right? That's the original reason for allowing people to privatize property and for inequalities to occur, is that it supposedly makes the pie larger for all of us. But if it makes the pie larger for all of us, it doesn't mean that those who have control of resources should be able to determine who lives and who doesn't on the basis of whether their activities are worth it or not. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I think there is lots of diversity of opinions in this table. I propose that we open the discussion with all the participants, and after some brief questions or comments, with some brief questions or comments, I will propose to have a second round in order to allow that the different participants in this table can also answer to each other. Please.
I'm going to ask a bit of a cynical question and then to make some comments. The cynical question is, participatory income is available as well for the richest part of the society, for them to be part of the care? Or are we always talking about the poorest? And I think this is an important thing, because so far in this meeting, I have never heard anything about the richest responsibilities. And I think if we want to go beyond the existing paradigm on solving the question of controlling or helping the poor to survive, I think we have to look at the whole, the complexity of the society. Otherwise, I don't see any advance in our looking at the future and putting basic income, universal basic income, as a transformative concept. The second question, I am a convinced European, so I look at our own history as Europeans. We know what is a welfare state is, we have a certain sense of reciprocity and a certain sense of common good. So I think the question of participation cannot be solved, as Tony argued at the time, on, forcing people to be part of care or voluntary work, but rather on how can we develop our creativity as Europeans to reinvent our future, our use of the resources, the solution of our problems. Because the discussion that is being run here only sits at the individual as such. This dilemma, are we going to pay for the services or not? It cannot be taken serious. We have to think if we Europeans are ready, for instance, to support an initiative at the European level to foster creativity by the people at different levels and come out with innovative solutions regarding their own reappropriation of resources and their own self-regulation. And I think this opens then to a completely different perspective of what is the meaning of participating, because participating means as well being able to transform, feeling the sense of belonging, and not only being forced to do care work, that I fully agree with you, should be paid much more than any other work because it's exhausting. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
If there is a man in between, he can speak before me.
Hello. I believe that the administrative problems associated with participation income are very real. I would also agree with the normative dimension that the whole debate of basic income has really started with recognizing the right to subsistence or right to basic resources, and to thus sort of deny this payment foundation would be to lose the moral high ground that we can gain in the debate. But I believe that the administrative problems do not just end with the kind of multiplicity of the issues that Jurgen mentioned, but I think it's fundamentally impossible to devise such criteria of participation from top down, which actually correspond to any notion of social value, that correspond to any notion of individual need. I mean, we can have rough criteria. The precise need for something like universal unconditional basic income is the impossibility of drawing those precise boundaries. And so I believe that the whole notion of equality of income has this normative foundation, and also this foundation of recognizing the impossibility of drawing those precise boundaries.
Thanks.
Thank you. So far, Austria hasn't occurred here, and therefore I will try to tell something about Austria and what we are for. In Austria, we have decided to bring in an income which is conditional, and we saw there are many problems with it. First problem is that the people who get work or have gotten work when it is precarious, they fight against the people who don't get any work, but they want to work. This is the first problem. The second problem is, that in Austria you have to get very poor to get this Mindestsicherung. You don't are allowed to have more than 5,000 euro in your konto, but if you want to pay for your own funeral, it will be more than 5,000 euro. So you don't have any reserve. You have to be down on the ground, and perhaps then you will get anything, a little thing. And and even it's about 850 this income people get who are working and get too less money for working, but also the people who don't get anywhere, it's 850. And it's very difficult to live there with this amount. So people are always held on the pressure of poverty. They can't get out of it. So we have decided, and when I say we, that's a roundtable of unconditional basic income, and there are many groups in it. We have decided to propose an unconditional, individual, universal income, high enough to live from. I will just mention what we mean. The state has to give as a right for each people, for everyone in the country, has to give some money from the birth to the death. And there's no condition to work for someone or something else. That means from the very beginning to the end. And you never lose this income. Even rich people will become it, but it will but the income he has will be lower by progressive income taxes and by using the money they have without working. They just get it because they have a capital, don't work for it, they're relegated, and they don't work for it and get richer and richer, and the scissors go auseinander. And also I belong as a member to a TAC. That's, perhaps a TAC. When we started our first European PCI, European. Yeah.
Can you ask if you can the discussion between basic income and participation?
After we had started this, we are a welfare state, I want to say, and we don't abolish the other social income people have, only what is really the same when each person, also child, get the income, the unconditional, they don't need any family things and so on, or they don't need when they don't have any work. And coming to work, we want not only to share money, but we also want to share working time. There should be a working time, a normal working time of 20 hours, so that everyone who can work can choose his sort of work and the
Any other question? I have 3 questions. After the questions, we return to the table to another answer.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to say until now we were speaking of participation as a condition always, but I think participation can also be a wish of a lot of people. And let's say we have a UBI one day, there might be people who don't know what to do with their lives. They might be avoided. So a lot of people might create something new, but some people might not know what to do with their lives. So this kind of participation income could also be a chance for certain people to say, okay, here I can find a sense again to do something for the society and can feel myself valuable. That's one point. And then the other thing, I'd like to come back on what you were saying. This should not be something for the poor, but it should be something for everybody. Like a civil service, as we have it in Switzerland, something like the military service, instead of military service, like Bürgerdienst in Germany. So it would be something, a service that everybody would do, voluntary service for the community, and this is not something too complex, I would say, because this already works nowadays. It would have to be something probably linked to the UBI somehow.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a couple of comments, following on from the previous speaker. In fact, the first comment I'd like to make is that it seems to me that there's a little bit of misinterpretation maybe going on in respect of what a participation income really is. So if you go to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, you'll find that in return for the rights that are given there is actually also a requirement to participate. But that participation, and some of the speakers have mentioned, is not necessarily monetary. So the distinction I would like to make is that you can have a participation, you can participate, but without actually getting, shall we say, paid income. And there the basic income is paid. Because if you listen to Guy Standing, which comes on to the second point I wanted to make, Guy Standing was talking about the emancipatory effects of basic income being more important than the monetary effects. I agree with you, actually. But we've never tested it. There's been no test of basic income as a concept anywhere, as far as I'm aware. But you were mentioning Mongolia, but I don't think it's quite the same. So those are the two comments I wanted to make, and I'd be interested to hear the panel.
My name is John Baker from Basic Income Ireland. Yeah, and this is really about the last three speakers and something that I think connects them. When you might say, and this participation income looks like a plausible idea, and you say, well, what's the difference between giving somebody basically kind of subsistence rate for participating, for doing care work, voluntary work, whatever, or hiring as a proper worker at a proper rate for doing that work. I mean, the difference is you're getting all that work on the sheet. If you see the participation income as a payment for this work, well then pay a proper rate, don't just pay people peanuts. Right? So the idea of the question I think that is a key here, and it has something to do with what you were saying about the administrative side of it, is that participation income effectively commodifies all human activity. It says, if you do this, you'll get paid for it. You won't get paid properly for it, but you'll get paid for it, and we'll survey it, we'll discipline you for it, we'll measure it, we'll do all the things that employers do except pay you properly. Whereas the idea of basic income is to support all kinds of activity that we want to kind of keep out of the commodification of human activities, whether it's certain kinds of care work that we think ought to be kept away from a pure contract of employment, certain kinds of voluntary activity, political activity, cultural activity, and so on. And I think that idea of the difference between paying somebody for doing something, which is the idea of employment, and supporting activities we want to protect from commodification, plays an important role in this debate.
Just a couple comments. So the first is, I think that maybe overlooked in this is perhaps that we discuss how there is a cognitive effect of poverty. It's very stressful, and so if you start participation income, I'm wondering, does care for oneself, is that included in that? Because the idea of the participation income, especially for people in poverty that have all these stressors, they have this additional stress, and now they have to meet this mandate, and what does that mean? And it's sort of replicating the same type of system that we already have. You have to meet these conditions, And that's why we have so many people falling through the cracks. So I'm wondering if you could address that. The second is, I'm wondering if anyone has engaged with the RSA proposal in the United Kingdom, where they discussed a sort of a participation income with no bite. Essentially, it's, when you graduate from high school, you work with mentors to come up with a plan of how you utilize basic income. And you meet with those mentors later, you meet with your teachers, community leaders later on as you go to college or what have you. But the state doesn't monitor it. And there's no actual penalty for whether you actually accomplished it, but it helps you kind of create a strategy as you go into adulthood, which I found a much more appealing and attractive policy proposal. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that as well. Thank you.
Well, we'll go to the second round with the questions on the table. I ask each of them to don't use more than 5 minutes in order to get to the last debate. After that, please.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for interesting insights into the topic. I have to say that I was a little bit uncomfortable with my colleagues' critical comments on Anthony Atkinson. And I think Evelyn Pocket had a very important notion that context and narrative matters. To me, the context is that Anthony Atkinson is one of the most influential writers on income inequality. And he put all his knowledge, all his views on his last book, and he didn't advocate universal basic income. And that certainly comes as a disappointment for those people who are advocating this idea. And I think that is the context here. And we can perhaps think about why he wasn't advocating universal basic income. But I think I was a little bit uncomfortable with Almaz's comments that Atkinson was not concerned about equality, or I think to some point you were reading between the lines things which were aren't there, because it wasn't, even the last book he wrote just a couple of pages about participation income, and it wasn't a philosophical treatise or just a study on participation income, so it was just one of his suggestions to reduce income inequality. And why he did think that this participation income would reduce income inequality. I think there are two really different schools of thoughts here. One is this kind of a social dividend idea, and one is the social participation idea. And you can also think about those in terms of providing also for the non-deserving poor, as the social dividend line of thinking, or just providing for the deserving poor. To me, it seems that we really opted for the second line of thought. And what's also important to underline here that when we talk about conditionality, conditionality doesn't mean in Atkinson's context that people will be completely left out with benefits. So it's kind of participation income is kind of a bonus. And in that sense, also this idea of thinking it as a kind of a wage or pay for some work, I think it's misleading. I think it was more like and Alma, you talk about reciprocity. I think you could have also talked about recognition, because to me it seems that it's a recognition of effort which is not otherwise recognized. And also when it comes to division of resources in a society, social relations matter as well. And when we talk about this problem of free riding, we could also say that the critics against the universal basic income is that it's like buying out people from the system. We just give them money. Let's all the others enjoy the tremendous fruits of productivity growth, and then we'll just give some money for those people who are not going to participate in our society any longer, and we just forget them. And that comes to Jurgen's point about administration. I think you have a very technical approach to this question of administration, and I think it comes perhaps from the British context where there is perhaps a tendency, as well as in the usage, that civil servants are really enemies and they are intruding into people's lives. I guess that my own context, the Nordic context, is really very different, where we think that the people who work for the public sector, they are there to support and help. And the idea is to provide support and help for people to be included in the society. And in that effort, participation income could be one instrument. Because if people are really passive and they don't want to do anything besides just playing computer games, you could say that, well, if you could think about participating in this training course, or if you could, take this one elderly person out once a day, we could think that you're going to get as a bonus this participation income. And I think there is a big problem of people being excluded from the society. I think there is quite convincing results coming from the US, which shows that the computer games nowadays are so much fun that young people's labor supply has decreased because they want to spend their time playing computer games. And then when we just think that let's give them universal basic income, and that's their way of being creative by playing computer games. So I don't think that's a good idea for participating and creating a community, a sustainable community. So I think that's where Atkinson's contribution comes to play, that he thought that participation income is a better way to include everybody in society.
I hope that my fellows will also say some sentences. As a chair, I'm not supposed to make a participation directly, but I had the opportunity in last years of discuss several times with Tony Atkinson the idea of participation income. And I have no doubt that the reason that was the base of the participation income proposed by Tony, it's the same reason why he sympathized with the idea of the basic income. It's because he believes that both can be a way to improve welfare state and to improve social justice. I think that Tony clearly believes that the idea of participation income, it's a way to go where the market doesn't go in order of integration of persons. I think that if we believe that our proposals are in a framework of improved welfare state and improved social justice, we cannot discard poorly the idea of the participation income. Thanks.
I will try to respond to some of the comments and some of the questions directly, but in a very different order that they were presented. So the first about the point for the civic service, I completely agree. Actually, I believe that one way that we will test the participation income policy is by looking at the different civil service programs in the world. We have a lot of data about that. We know how they decide the kind of activities that they will perform. So there's a place where we can look at once we want to evaluate this kind of policy. So I completely agree. About how to decide the list, that's a big issue. But I think that there are some mechanisms to do that. That they are not extremely arbitrary. For instance, in many places, in many cities around the world, people get together to decide how to spend money in different ways. Why we cannot get together to decide which kind of activities are necessary for the community or for that particular community? That would be a possible way to decide a list. The problem is that all this debate about participation income and unconditional basic income is always presented in very universalistic terms. And by that I mean not mean test, I mean universalistic in the sense that we can just design one policy and apply that to everywhere. And that doesn't make any sense, right? So the argument that I believe that it's better to implement a participation income in different countries is because it's a contingency argument. In many societies, you have different unmet social needs that you have to address in some way. And maybe this policy that is not incompatible with a universal, with an unconditional basic income, we can figure out some kind of way to put both policies to work together with different ways of implementation. But we can use this like a mechanism to motivate people to engage in different activities that are useful for those particular societies. And what is the last point? Sorry.
Thanks, Cristian.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for all those contributions. I mean, I sort of felt myself agreeing with lots of different things here. So I'm not going to particularly pick up on sort of, lots of specific issues. I mean, two things I want to say. I mean, obviously, first of all, I have to say, Heikki, I couldn't quite fully understand. I mean, with the microphone, we literally couldn't fully hear everything you said. But the one thing I got is what you were saying for sure about, Atkinson's motivation about social inclusion, and that is absolutely dead on. So there's no doubt that Tony Atkinson was in our camp, in a sense, in being very, very worried about social exclusion, about inequality, and so on and so forth. And he was very clear in, the original paper that, look, in many ways, citizens' income, yes, very interesting, but, one big issue, on originality, you can't sell it politically. Here is a proposal that tries to deal with that, right? So far, so good. But once you bring in politics, you have to take politics seriously. Now, a lot of things I've heard here was talking about participation in a sort of, participation as a personal value, or participation. It would be great if we had participation more targeted towards, certain service and so on and so forth. All these things are all fine. I mean, I can see that. But if you think about moving towards a serious change in our system now, you have to think about what are the political coalitions in favor of that change. And if the problem with the basic income is that, somehow we can't sell the unconditionality, we have to make it conditional, then you have to take that conditionality seriously. Then it's not just an optional thing, it can't just be a weak thing. Otherwise, that coalition is just not going to be there. But then if you take the conditionality seriously, then all these administration things really do come into it, right? And this is not, and I have to be very clear about this as well, I'm not one of these people. In fact, I think as some people here know, I've written enough about how in this income we should be very careful how we treat bureaucrats and administrators. I mean, you're not all the enemy, right? I used to be a social worker myself. I was on that side of the fence, if you like, right? So there is a lot to be done. It would be great if we could reorientate much of our administration away from people processing towards supporting people. That would be brilliant. It's exactly the thing that Tony proposes in the book. It's exactly the sort of thing that myself and Lindsay would love to see. The question is, can we get that in current political circumstances? And I'm worried that that's a lot of wishful thinking. And if that's a lot of wishful thinking, then your administration is still going to be bogged down in people processing and a lot of it being outsourced to private organizations. I mean, the UK is a prime example of that. Maybe it's the wrong example. Maybe, maybe things are very, very different in other countries, but I see these moves in other places as well, right? You have the people processing, you have the sense that this condition in the participation is going to be treated more narrowly. It's genuine risk is going to be treated more narrowly. And at that point, your participation income becomes a trap. It's not the sort of thing that Tony Atkinson intended, but our view basically is that it will slide into that under current circumstances. If that's, if we are right on that, then I think definitely opts for unconditional basic income. The participation income thing is a very dangerous road to take under those circumstances.
Comments talk about the benefits of participation. Heikki and Cristian were talking about in terms of creating a more inclusive society. I certainly am in favor of participation. The question is, should it be enforced? Should it be receipt of minimalist social assistance payments? And there, if possible, I come from an even worse example, in terms of coming from the United States, where there's absolutely no doubt that a participation condition would be enforced disproportionately on racial minorities, immigrants, children of immigrants, and on women. So I think that there are a lot of issues related to social inclusion that need to be solved, that need to be addressed. My question is, are they better addressed once everybody has the minimum amount of money that they need to live a decent life, or are they better addressed before that happens? And for me, the answer is clear that it's better to attack that problem once we provide for everybody a decent minimum. And just to give one example, in the United States, before the big expansion of Social Security, in the United States, by Social Security, we mean social insurance payments to retired former workers who qualified for Social Security payments. Before Social Security was really expanded in the 1960s, the elderly or senior citizens were the largest demographic group in poverty. The majority of senior citizens were poor, or by a very major poverty definition in the United States, or they were poor. They are now, as a result of Social Security expansion, the smallest demographic group in poverty. What's the largest demographic group in poverty? Single parents with children, overwhelmingly single women with children. So again, who are we talking about enforcing the participation requirement on? We're talking about enforcing it on the most vulnerable people in our society, who, at least in the United States, are the people who are responsible for care work, for which they are not being paid, and for which, in the United States, there are very few public options as well. So I start from that context. I say, let's go with an unconditional minimum benefits. I think it can actually be smaller than some people argue for in terms of making a real difference, as long as it goes to adults and children, because it only goes to adults who don't really affect the poverty status of single-parent families with multiple children. So start there, and then let's talk about how we build a more inclusive society. And I'm fully supportive of, again, I think context matters, and different societies do choose different things. I think a Swiss-style, Israeli-style military requirement for everybody seems like a very good idea to me in terms of building social solidarity. In the United States, we've made the decision to go with a smaller professional army that has its pros and cons. But I absolutely have no normative objection to universally impose participation requirements. The question is, should participation requirements be selectively enforced on people who do not have any other assets? To me, to make the argument for selective conditionality means that you are effectively defending the status quo distribution of income and wealth, which I can't do. I don't think that it's based on desserts. I think it's based on a lot of inherited inequalities. and a lot of structures in society that send more resources to politically powerful people, people of certain races, certain people of certain genders, and so on. And I can't defend that. So if you have a vastly unequal distribution of income and resources, which Tony Atkinson, as I said, was one of the strongest researchers in giving us that evidence, then to me, the argument against unconditional basic income can only be political. And I think that that's an important aspect to determine, and that will vary from country to country whether we can surmount that obstacle. But I don't see any normative objection. I only see a political objection.
Thanks. We have 7 minutes to take one question. 1, 2.
Hi. So it's just really 2 observations. The first one was in response to this. I did see that study saying labour force participation rates in the States have gone down because computer games are so entertaining. I think that's very similar to the same kind of thing you see. Why don't millennials, these headlines, why don't millennials buy diamonds? Why don't millennials buy cars? It's not as if they're in the same situation as people were 20 years ago when they were buying diamonds and cars. It's actually a much more complex thing. I would say if you were to look into why there's lower labour force participation rate, it's to do with the fact that there isn't opportunities for valorization, and yet there are in these virtual games, and we need to provide that in society. The second observation I would make is just about the fact that Jurgen, I think you mentioned that you wouldn't have a problem with this huge administration if it could be done efficiently. That's quite, okay, let me finish just the observation. It's interesting to note that right-wing supporters of basic income, one of the main things that interests them is being able to reduce the administrative state. And I didn't really hear that articulated as a benefit from anybody in the panel, and I just wonder, is that a view or did it just not come up?
Hello, this is Roundtable from the World Bank. Thank you very much for a very interesting panel. What I took away from it, clearly there were people who talked about the benefits of participation. What was interesting is why is that then linked to giving people something that they need to subsist? The benefits of participation apply equally well to a child who inherits wealth and then plays video games. So why, there's a bit of a coercive element that comes through when you say you only get what you really need to survive if you decide to participate in what we think is socially valuable.
Yeah, I guess it was a comment to Heikki and maybe also you on the idea that in the Scandinavian countries we have these civil servants who are working to help people, and that is different from other countries. I think there's something inherent about bureaucracy that works against the very goals it wants to achieve. So in Denmark, where I'm from, and I've studied caseworkers, they actually trained in schools for 4 to 5 years to become people-oriented. The last 2 decades have seen one policy after the other coming out of different governments. They've all been stressing that people should be at the center of every single effort. Every single piece of legislation have tried to stress that fact, and yet it doesn't happen. So I do not believe in this idea that we can just educate administration to be people-oriented. Yes.
Last question.
That kind of from Finland. We in Finland have some kind of forced participation for unemployed people. We have to do something. But if I would do what my government wants me to do, I would not be here discussing basic income. Because what they put us do is some meaningless work which is not fun, not useful, nothing. So I strongly against forced participation as some kind of pre-condition for basic income. That they don't really work together.
Well, when we proposed this participation income for Finland, we were attacked heavily both from the left and right. And I guess there is a lot of misunderstandings here. One basic misunderstanding is that participation would be conditioned for for getting enough money to live on. I think this participation income is a kind of a bonus, a recognition of people engaging in socially relevant activities. So it's not a condition of not getting by. So I think that's a big misunderstanding. So it's kind of a bonus for participating in socially beneficial activities. And when it comes to these political dynamics, Jurgen and also Almaz were talking. So I think we have to consider that people are not voting only on self-interest. They're also voting on moral attributions. And this moral attribution of participating is much stronger than giving people money for free. And I think that was the main reason for Atkinson to support this idea. I think he thought that by framing an extra bonus in the social security system, it would give some extra money for those people who are really struggling, and also it would also recognize their activities. And when it comes to the US context, I was kind of surprised that Almaz, you said that Atkinson's participation income would actually worsen the situation of lone mothers, for example. While currently, as far as I understood, there is a very strong work condition enforced also on single mothers. And in that case, if participation income would be implemented in the US, it would mean that single mothers would fulfill this participation condition only by the fact that they are single mothers. So it would certainly improve their position. They wouldn't be forced to participate in work or activities, for example.
Not a conclusive one, it's a departure point. I think that the debate about participation income and the basic income, if they are complementary or conflictual, it's something that will remain in next few times. Thanks to all for your participation.
Every time